Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Sage, the Executive Director of the area, and welcome to our latest Fireside Chat. I'm here with the CEO and founder of Keen Research, been an area member for a number of years now and doing some amazing and really exciting stuff here. So Oggy, thanks very much for your time. Please perhaps introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the story of Keen Research.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, my name is Ognjen Todic. I'm the CEO of Keen Research. And what Keen Research does is we develop software development kits for on-device speech recognition on mobile devices and custom hardware platforms. So our SDK runs on iOS, Android, Linux, and most recently we released a web version of the SDK and allows developers to provide speech recognition functionality in their products. I would say the key takeaway in what we do is that with our solution, all the processing happens locally on the device or offline. In other words, internet connectivity is not required for speech recognition to work. So that's kind of at a high level what we do. In terms of how this whole thing started, we started about 7 years ago, and I was basically tinkering with some mobile apps for kids. A friend of mine reached out and asked why there wasn't an app that that can help kids practice multiplication facts. And I started playing, built something, and in the process, I realized that it would need to be on device if you wanted low latency. And then for scaling on device also makes a lot more sense when it comes to cost. So, I was kind of plugging along, and then I quickly realized there was really actually an unmet need in the market for tools that would do this, not necessarily, well, there's probably need for educational apps, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so I decided to actually focus on building the SDK instead of this educational app. I'm based in San Francisco Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, the land of startups, venture funding, and so on. So another interesting angle in our story is that I've actually bootstrapped this company, and for the first 3 years, it was only me. So I was doing kind of development, coding stuff, trying to sell or selling the product, business development, etc. So wearing lots of different hats, which I still do, but we kind of have been organically growing the customer base, but the team too also. So we're about 5 people now, and we're still self-funded. But around here, that's very unusual, and especially until about a year ago, or year and a half ago, when there was a lot of kind of free money floating around, and it's been a tough journey. Hiring people, trying to find somebody, it's not an easy undertaking. A lot of times, people take raising money as a proxy for, hey, this company is successful, but that's actually not the case typically. So anyway, things are a little bit different nowadays, and it turns out that free money wasn't really free, and everybody talks about profitability, revenue. So to some extent, it's kind of back to basics, aside from maybe the most recent AI hype. But anyway, what this approach of bootstrapping basically forced us is to focus on opportunities that can bring revenue. So it forced us to focus on building things that add value to our customers, because frankly, that's the only way they would part with money, right? Again, back to basics. And then also the feedback loop is much shorter. It's not like we have a ton of money in the bank and we're building stuff, and then 2 years later we realize, well, nobody wants to buy this, right? This is kind of like if we make things that don't sell, we might as well close the shop. So we have a number of customers actually in EdTech, helping kids learn how to read or learn a new language. Lots of interesting big names like Viacom, Paramount, Baiju and Osmo, PBS Kids, and a number of startups as well. But we also have quite a bit of customers and traction in enterprise software, and primarily kind of focused on frontline workers use cases, kind of hands-free, always-on listening. And obviously, this is why we're here today. And in this space, there's some use cases that have been around for a while, like voice picking, for example, helping people in warehouses do their job. But there's a lot of other similar use cases, like digital workflows, procedures, checklists, training, where the voice makes a lot of sense. And I would say the gist of it is that people are doing, frontline workers are doing their work, usually using their hands, right? And there is a need to interact with some software in this process, right? So whether to input some information or to query the system for some information. And hands may be in the gloves, they may be greasy, eyes should be focused on a machine, or you might be in an environment where the safety is a concern. So and you need to interact with the device, and this is where voice becomes as a very natural kind of interface modality for interaction with the device. I can tell you a little bit about some of our customers in this space, maybe. As I said, we have a few customers who are using the SDK for voice picking. That's kind of a no-brainer scenario. There is a super cool app that's actually a consumer app, so I wouldn't call it enterprise, but it's highly relevant, I think. It's called Mira Check, and it's a virtual assistant for sports pilots. So imagine you're flying your own Cessna, and so this kind of touches all these different scenarios that I mentioned. So there's before you go take off, there is a pre-flight checklist, right? And so instead of walking around with a piece of paper or with an iPad, looking at the screen and maybe tripping on a fuel hose or something like that, you're basically walking with a headset, and the app tells you what you're supposed to check, and you're checking it. And it's very kind of interactive, very streamlined process. And then you hop in the plane, you start flying, and then you can ask for certain information, the weather at your destination, etc. So and then there's another company called Amplify, which is a SaaS platform for digital workflows, procedures, checklists, and so on. So these are just some ideas on how our product has been used so far.
Which is amazing, thank you. And I think you've answered a little bit of my kind of second question about the kind of role and the importance of voice interactions. You mentioned the kind of potential struggles of wearing gloves or not being able to move your hands around and things like that. I'm assuming that frontline workers find that all very easy to do. It's just using their natural language and stuff like that. But how about things like if there's quite a lot of background noise or things like that? How does the voice interaction work there? Have you got some tips and ideas from that?
Yeah. So let me just kind of back to kind of the original question of kind of role of voice. I see there's kind of two things here. Like voice is a modality for interaction with the device, right? With AR or with just in general these frontline worker use cases. Input modalities are limited, frankly. Whether it's because of the constraints of the environment, you need to wear gloves, you need to focus on something else, or because of the constraints of the device, right? They may not be a keyboard at all, right? There's some controllers or stuff like that. So voice is, in general, a natural kind of interface. And in these situations, it's even more natural, I would say. And then there's another area which I'd like to come back, but first I'll address your question about environment and noise and stuff like that, which is kind of the when we're here, it's augmented reality is the kind of the premise here, and a lot of times that's kind of the focus is on vision, and I feel like audio gets neglected a little bit. I think there's a lot of interesting use cases where you don't need this kind of Terminator interface with fancy vision stuff. There's a lot of places where that's adding a lot of value, and I'm not neglecting that, but I think there's a number of cases where you don't actually need that. You can just do stuff with voice and audio, right? So, but then back to your question, obviously in this environment, there is noise, there's different types of scenarios where the solution needs to be robust. So there is a number of kind of tips there. Typically, there are the headsets are involved because again, because of hands-free environment. So you have a boom mic, or you have some sort of setup that's already built to help with canceling or subtracting or reducing the noise, and then picking up the voice from the user, because either with the AR headset the mics are right there close to your mouth, or there's a boom mic with the headset, headphones and microphone that again is kind of focused on picking up your voice. So that's one. Our models that we train in-house are robust to background noise. So generally we don't see a lot of challenges with like machinery and stuff like that. The biggest challenge I would say is crosstalk, like when other people are talking. So it's not so much the noise, it's here's you're next to somebody else and maybe they're doing the same thing and they're using the same system, and how do you tell, well, this person is talking to their device and I'm talking to my own device? That's the biggest challenge. And again, headsets can actually help a lot with that. But also a lot of use cases are actually not. This is not an issue, because people are like voice speaking. You're roaming around the warehouse. It's not like there's somebody standing next to you doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. But I agree with your point about augmented audio is often overlooked, and it's great to know that you're doing something in the space and really helping, say, kind of end users, frontline workers in the enterprise space. Then one last final question, and you mentioned it in your first question, was about the difference between on-device kind of processing and edge processing. It'd be great for you to explain a little bit more, maybe some of the kind of benefits and the challenges, and what companies should be looking for if they're thinking of different use cases in this space.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously we're focused on device, and what that means is really that when you capture the audio on the device, all the speech recognition processing happens locally on that, let's say, mobile phone or AR headset. You don't need to stream the audio to the cloud for speech recognition processing, right? So obviously with on-device processing, you don't need to rely on internet connectivity. So your app can work in places where there's no internet. One thing we've learned in the past couple of years, our initial selling point was like, well, you don't need internet, either have it or not have it. It's actually quite interesting that in different verticals, ed tech, frontline workers, and enterprise software also, it's not necessarily whether you have it or not have it, but whether you have reliable internet. Right? Because if your service is relying, and especially with these use cases where you need to actually run this thing, like it's not like Siri where you just make a request and then a lot of these use cases require always on listening, right? So if internet is not reliable, if it's flaky, guess what? Your service is going to appear flaky. It's not going to work for that worker. So that's a big one. Everything happens locally on the device. Privacy and security is another big factor. I don't know if you're aware. We're on Teams now, but we use Zoom also. Zoom a couple of days ago changed their terms of service, and they said that now they have the right to use to record and use the information recorded to develop their machine learning models, for example. So what that means, and there's now people are actually, there's some noise around that now, right? And people are starting to question, hey, why? And sorry, just to kind of go back, what this means is not just, hey, we're gonna and again, I haven't read their terms of service, so I don't know the details, but typically, when you have this kind of data, at some point, somebody needs to a human really needs to do something with it. There's ways to use this data without kind of an unsupervised manner, but typically at least some fraction of the data needs to be looked at by humans, right? So transcribed, annotated in certain ways. So, is the enterprise willing to actually let that happen, right? That's a big one. Scalability, right? again, if you have a number of users, you need a backend that will actually, be able to fulfill that. With on device, there is a computer in your pocket, and if it runs on it, it just runs. There's no, and this is also comes back to reliability. I mentioned internet reliability, but there's also backend, right? That needs to be running 24/7 if you want it to be reliable. I mentioned these always-on listening use cases. They would be really, really hard to do with the cloud. Imagine you're just walking with a headset, and you can just say what you need. And this is typically a limited number of things, because you don't need to know the weather in San Francisco or London, if you're working in a warehouse, right? But you don't want to have some sort of a wake word like Siri or Alexa, right? Because you're using this nonstop, right? So very quickly that gets in the way. So you need basically something that runs all the time. And again, tying a port on the cloud server for this would be prohibitively expensive. So then the next thing is the cost also, right? So all these cloud services are usage based. The business model is usage based, right? So if you have a product that runs speech recognition for an 8-hour shift, your cost will go through the roof. It's just not feasible.
So to kind of summarize that, there's definitely some cost considerations, there's performance considerations, there's like environmental, but the network kind of considerations and things like that. So obviously the model you've chosen is on device, and some obvious really great reasons for that. Fantastic. Well, I think we've come to the end to our quite short fireside chat here. Okay, thank you very much. Look forward to continuing working with you in the area. And if anybody's got any questions, they can come back to me and to yourself. And thanks again for all your kind of support and great work in this space.
Thank you, Mark.